The storm that changed everything, the blizzard hit Edinburgh like nature's fury unleashed. Snow whipped through the streets with such violence that even the city's ancient stone buildings seemed to shiver against the cold. Gabriel Ashworth gripped the steering wheel of his silver Mercedes tighter as he navigated the treacherous roads leading to his manor on the outskirts of the city. At 32, Gabriel had built a tech empire worth hundreds of millions. But tonight, all his wealth couldn't protect him from the raw power of the Scottish winter. Gabriel lived alone in his sprawling estate, a choice that suited his quiet nature perfectly. After losing his parents in a car accident when he was just 20, he had thrown himself into work, building walls around his heart as carefully as he had built his business. The manor, with its towering stone walls and vast, empty rooms, reflected his solitary existence. He preferred the silence, the predictability, the absence of emotional complications that came with letting people too close. But tonight, as his headlights cut through the swirling snow, something would shatter that carefully constructed isolation. Forever, two angels in the storm, as Gabriel approached the wrought iron gates of his property. His headlights illuminated something that made his heart stop. Two small figures huddled against the stone pillars, barely visible through the curtain of falling snow. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Would be out in weather like this, especially children. Gabriel slammed on the brakes, his car sliding slightly on the icy road before coming to a stop. He rushed out into the storm, the bitter wind cutting through his expensive coat like ice daggers. The two figures were indeed children, twin girls, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, were dressed in thin jackets that offered no protection against the brutal cold, their small bodies shaking violently. "Dear God," Gabriel whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "What are you doing out here?" The girls looked up at him with identical pairs of blue eyes, wide with fear and exhaustion. One had slightly longer hair than the other, but otherwise, they were mirror images of each other. Their lips were turning blue, and Gabriel could see that they were on the verge of hypothermia. Without hesitation, Gabriel scooped both girls into his arms, surprised by how light they felt. They seemed like fragile birds, all bones and trembling skin. He carried them through the gate and up the long driveway to his manor, his feet slipping on the icy stones as he fought against the wind. Sanctuary found Mrs. Hammond, Gabriel's loyal housekeeper, who had been with the family since before his parents died, opened the door before he could even knock. Her weathered face showed immediate concern as she took in the sight of the two frozen children in his arms. "Merciful heavens, Mr. Ashworth, where did you find them?" she gasped, stepping aside to let them into the warmth of the grand foyer. "The gates," Gabriel replied, his voice tight with worry. "Quick, we need to get them warm." Mrs. Hammond sprang into action with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with emergencies before. She hurried to the linen closet while Gabriel carried the girls into the sitting room, where a fire crackled invitingly in the stone fireplace. He gently placed them on the plush sofa, wrapping them in his own coat until Mrs. Hammond returned with thick blankets and dry clothes. As the warmth began to seep into their small bodies, the girls slowly stopped shaking. Gabriel knelt beside the sofa, studying their faces with growing concern. They were beautiful children, with delicate features and those striking blue eyes. But there was something haunting in their expressions, a wariness that spoke of experiences no child should have. "What are your names?" Gabriel asked gently, his voice softer than it had been in years. The girl with the longer hair spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I'm Rosalie."
"This is my sister Celeste. And how did you end up at my gates in the middle of a blizzard?" Gabriel continued, though he kept his tone carefully neutral. Not wanting to frighten them further, Celeste, who had been silent until now, looked up with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "Our stepfather brought us here," he said. "You are rich and might take care of us since our mama is sick." Gabriel felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "Where is your stepfather now?" "Gone," Rosalie said simply. "He drove away after he left us at your gate. He said if you didn't want us, we could walk to town and find somewhere else to go." The weight of abandonment, the casual cruelty of abandoning. Two children in a deadly storm hit Gabriel like a physical blow. He had seen ruthless business practices, encountered people who would do anything for money. But this level of heartless neglect toward innocent children was beyond his comprehension. Mrs. Hammond turned with steaming mugs of hot chocolate and warm soup, fussing over the girls with the maternal instincts she had never been able to use for children of her own. As Rosalie and Celeste slowly sipped their drinks, color began to return to their pale cheeks. "Tell me about your mother," Gabriel said, settling into the armchair across from them. "What happened to her?" "She's in the hospital," Celeste explained, her small hands wrapped around the warm mug. "She got sick and won't wake up. The doctors say she might never wake up, but we know she will. She promised she would always come back to us." Rosalie nodded eagerly. "Mama said promises are sacred, and she never breaks her promises. Derek said she was just wasting away, and we were too. Much trouble to keep around." Gabriel's jaw tightened at the mention of the stepfather's name. The man had clearly seen the girls as burdens, rather than the precious gifts they were. As he watched them drink their soup with delicate, careful movements, Gabriel noticed details that spoke of neglect. Their clothes were too small and worn. Thin. They were painfully thin themselves, suggesting they hadn't been eating regular meals. Most telling of all was the way they sat close together, as if they had learned that they could only rely on each other, a heart beginning to thaw as the evening wore on. Gabriel found himself drawn into conversation with the twins in a way that surprised him. Rosalie was the more talkative of the two, telling him about their life before their mother became ill. She spoke of bedtime stories and weekend trips to the park, of a mother who worked 2 jobs but always made time for her daughters. Celeste was quieter, but Gabriel noticed she was incredibly observant. Her eyes took in every detail of the room, from the expensive artwork on the walls to the leather-bound books lining the shelves. When Mrs. Hammond brought her a piece of paper and some colored pencils, Celeste began drawing with a skill that seemed impossible for someone her age. "You're very talented," Gabriel observed, watching as she created a perfect likeness of the sitting room, complete with the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Celeste looked up at him with a shy smile. "Mama taught us that art is how you capture the beauty in the world even when everything seems dark." Those words hit Gabriel unexpectedly deep. For years, he had focused on building his business empire, accumulating wealth and success, but he had forgotten about capturing beauty. His life had become a series of spreadsheets and board meetings, devoid of the simple wonder that this 8-year-old girl could still see despite her difficult circumstances. The promise of tomorrow as the night grew later and the storm continued to rage outside, Gabriel made a decision that would change all their lives forever. He couldn't send these children back into the cold, and he certainly couldn't abandon them the way their stepfather had. There would be legal complications, social services to contact, and 100 practical concerns to address. But none of that mattered in this moment. "Would you like to stay here tonight?" he asked gently. "Tomorrow, we can figure out what comes next, but for now, you're safe and warm." The relief that flooded both girls' faces was answer enough. Mrs. Hammond showed them to one of the guest bedrooms, a room that had been empty for years, but suddenly felt filled with purpose. As Gabriel tucked them into the large bed, Rosalie reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for not leaving us in the snow," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me enough to let me help," Gabriel replied, surprising himself with the emotion in his voice. Later that night, as Gabriel sat in his study, staring out at the storm, realized that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. 2 small girls had appeared at his gates like a gift from the universe, and in helping them, he was beginning to remember what it felt like to truly care about someone else. The blizzard outside was finally beginning to calm. But inside Gabriel's heart, a different kind of storm was just beginning. It was the storm of love, of family, of connections that would prove stronger than blood and more valuable than all the wealth he had accumulated. Tomorrow would bring challenges and decisions that would test them all. But tonight, for the first time in over a decade, Gabriel Ashworth's house felt like a home. Morning light and new beginnings dawn broke over Edinburgh with a crystalline clarity that only comes after fierce storms. The snow had stopped falling, leaving behind a world transformed into something magical and pure. Gabriel woke earlier than usual, drawn from sleep by the unfamiliar sounds of children's voices drifting through his manor. For a moment, he lay in bed wondering if the previous night had been an elaborate dream. But the soft giggles from downstairs confirmed that his life had indeed changed forever. When Gabriel made his way to the kitchen, he found a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just 24 hours earlier. Mrs. Hammond was teaching. Rosalie had to crack eggs properly, while Celeste sat at the large wooden table. Her colored pencils spread before her as she worked on a new drawing. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting everything in a golden glow that made the ordinary kitchen feel enchanted. "Good morning," Gabriel said softly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful atmosphere. Both girls looked up, with bright smiles that sent an unexpected warmth spreading through his chest. They were wearing clothes that Mrs. Hammond had found in storage, clothes that had once belonged to Gabriel when he was their age. Seeing them in his childhood pajamas created a connection that felt both nostalgic and hopeful. "We're making breakfast for everyone," Rosalie announced proudly, holding up an egg. "Mrs. Hammond is teaching us how to cook properly so we can help take care of ourselves." Gabriel noticed the subtle emphasis on the words, and he realized that these children had learned far too young that they needed to be self-sufficient. The thought of them trying to fend for themselves broke something inside him that he hadn't even known was still intact. Facing the outside world after breakfast, Gabriel knew he couldn't postpone the practical realities any longer. There were phone calls to make, authorities to contact, and legal processes to begin. But first, he needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. Dr. Patricia Wells arrived within an hour of Gabriel's call. She was a pediatrician he had met through his charitable work at the Children's Hospital, a compassionate woman with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Gabriel had specifically requested her because he trusted her discretion and her genuine care for children. Dr. Wells examined both girls thoroughly while Gabriel and Mrs. Hammond waited anxiously in the sitting room. When she emerged, her expression was serious but not alarming. "They're malnourished," she reported quietly, "but nothing that proper care and regular meals won't fix. More concerning are the signs of emotional neglect.
Oh.
These children have been caring for themselves far longer than they should have. They're remarkably resilient, but they'll need stability and patience to fully trust that they're safe." Gabriel absorbed this information with growing anger at the stepfather, who had failed them so completely. What about their mother? "Do you know anything about her condition?" Dr. Wells nodded. "I made some calls to Royal Infirmary. Miranda Winters has been in a coma for 3 months following a severe head injury from a car accident. Her prognosis is uncertain, but she's stable. The girls have been visiting her regularly, though I understand their stepfather recently stopped bringing them." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, painting a picture of 2 little girls watching their world crumble around them, while the adults, who should have protected them, failed at every turn. Legal guardians and temporary homes to Moss Reed. Gabriel's family lawyer was a man accustomed to handling complex business negotiations. But even he seemed moved by the circumstances surrounding Rosalie and Celeste. He arrived that afternoon with a briefcase full of forms and a head full of concerns about the legal implications of Gabriel's impromptu rescue. "The immediate priority is getting temporary guardianship," Thomas explained, as they sat in Gabriel's study while the girls played in the garden under Mrs. Hammond's watchful eye, given that they were essentially abandoned and are currently without any legal guardian. The courts will likely be sympathetic. However, we need to be prepared for the stepfather to potentially contest this if he realizes there might be financial benefit involved. Gabriel's expression hardened. "What kind of financial benefit? You're a wealthy man, Gabriel. Some people might see taking in these children as a way to access that wealth, either through manipulation or legal claims. We need to protect both you and the girls from that possibility." He spent the next several hours working through the paperwork. But Gabriel's mind kept wandering to the window where he could see Rosalie and Celeste building a snowman together. Their laughter carried on the crisp air, and he realized that no amount of legal complexity could diminish the simple joy of watching them play safely in his garden. The hospital visit 3 days later. Gabriel made a decision that would prove pivotal for all of them. Despite Thomas Reed's concerns about getting too emotionally involved before the legal situation was resolved, Gabriel knew he needed to meet Miranda Winters. The girls had been asking about visiting their mother, and Gabriel felt he needed to understand this woman who had raised such remarkable daughters. The Royal Infirmary was a maze of sterile corridors and antiseptic smells, but Gabriel barely noticed his surroundings as he followed Rosalie and Celeste to their mother's room. The girls moved through the hospital with the familiarity of frequent visitors, greeting nurses by name and navigating the halls with quiet confidence. Miranda Winters lay in the intensive care unit, surrounded by machines that monitored her vital signs with electronic precision. She was younger than Gabriel had expected, probably in her early 30s, with the same delicate features as her daughters. Even in her unconscious state, there was something peaceful about her face, as if she was simply sleeping deeply rather than fighting for her life. "Hi, Mama," Rosalie whispered, taking her mother's hand gently. "We brought someone to meet you. His name is Gabriel, and he's been taking care of us while you're getting better." Celeste placed a new drawing on the bedside table, this one showing all four of them standing together in a sunny meadow. "I drew us all together so you can see what it will be like when you wake up," she explained to her mother's still form. Gabriel felt his throat tighten as he watched the girls interact with their mother, with such faith in their voices, such unwavering belief that she would return to them. He found himself hoping desperately that their faith would be rewarded, even as the rational part of his mind acknowledged how uncertain her recovery was. Unexpected complications. The peaceful routine they had established was shattered a week later, when Derek Blackwood, the stepfather, appeared at Gabriel's front door with a police officer and a social worker. Mrs. Eleanor Price was a stern woman in her 50s who seemed to view Gabriel with immediate suspicion, as if wealthy men who took in abandoned children were automatically suspect. "Mr. Ashworth," she said crisply, "I need to speak with the children privately and assess their current living situation. There have been allegations that you may have taken them without proper authority." Gabriel felt his temper flare, but he forced himself to remain calm. Through the window, he could see Derek Blackwood standing by a battered car, smoking a cigarette and looking pleased with himself. The man hadn't even bothered to come to the door personally, content to let others do his dirty work. The interview process was grueling. Mrs. Price questioned the girls separately, inspected every room they had access to, scrutinized Gabriel's motives with the thoroughness of a detective investigating a crime. But as the hours passed, Gabriel noticed something changing in her demeanor. The girls spoke about their time at the manor with such genuine happiness, describing feeling safe and cared for in ways that clearly surprised the social worker. "They saved us," Celeste said simply, when Mrs. Price asked about Gabriel and Mrs. Hammond. "When we were cold and scared, they brought us inside and made us warm." Rosalie nodded emphatically. "Gabriel reads us stories every night, and Mrs. Hammond is teaching us how to bake cookies. Nobody ever taught us those things before." The truth emerges. The investigation into Derek Blackwood revealed a pattern of neglect that made Gabriel's blood boil. Thomas Reed had hired a private investigator who uncovered evidence of gambling debts, unpaid bills, and a lifestyle funded by Miranda's salary while she worked 2 jobs to support the family. Most damning of all were the testimonies from neighbors who reported seeing the girls left alone for days at a time while Derek disappeared on unexplained trips. "He only came back because he heard about your wealth," Thomas explained during one of their strategy sessions. Apparently someone at the hospital mentioned that a rich man had taken in Miranda's daughters, and Derek suddenly became very interested in reclaiming his parental rights. The court hearing was scheduled for the following month, but Gabriel was no longer worried about the outcome. He had seen the evidence, witnessed the girls' transformation during their time at the manor, and most importantly, he had discovered something about himself that he never expected to find. Love in unexpected places one evening, as Gabriel was tucking the girls into bed, Rosalie asked him a question that stopped him in his tracks. "Gabriel, do you think you could love us like a real daddy would?" The simplicity of the question hit him like a lightning bolt. Over the past month, these 2 little girls had crept into his heart so completely that he couldn't imagine his life without them. They had filled his empty house with laughter and warmth, taught him the joy of bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes, and shown him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or sold. "I already do," he whispered, and realized it was the most honest thing he had said in years. Celeste smiled sleepily. "We love you too, and Mrs. Hammond, in this house that feels like home." Gabriel turned off the lights and closed their bedroom door. He reflected on how completely his world had changed. A month ago, he had been a successful but lonely man living in isolation. Now, he was part of a family, bound together not by blood, but by something stronger: choice, commitment, and love. The legal battles would continue, and there would be challenges ahead, but Gabriel knew with absolute certainty that he would fight for these girls with everything he had. They had given him something infinitely more valuable than anything his wealth could buy. They'd given him a reason to build a life worth living. The verdict of Hearts. The courtroom was filled with tension as Judge Helena Morrison reviewed the final documents in the custody case. Gabriel sat with Thomas Reed at the plaintiff's table while across the aisle, Derek Blackwood fidgeted nervously beside his court-appointed attorney. The past 2 months had been a whirlwind of interviews, home visits, and psychological evaluations. But Gabriel had never wavered in his determination to provide Rosalie and Celeste with the stable, loving home they deserved. The girls themselves had been the most compelling witnesses. When Judge Morrison interviewed them privately in her chambers, they spoke with a maturity that belied their young age, about feeling safe and loved for the first time in years. Celeste had even brought one of her drawings to show the judge. A picture of their new family gathered around the dinner table, everyone smiling and holding hands. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying the weight of careful deliberation, "I have seen many cases involving the welfare of children. But rarely have I encountered a situation where the best interests of the children are so clearly evident." Gabriel held his breath, aware that Rosalie and Celeste were sitting in the gallery behind him with Mrs. Hammond, their small hands clasped together as they waited to learn their fate. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge continued, turning to address the stepfather directly, "your own testimony has revealed a pattern of neglect and abandonment that cannot be overlooked. You admitted under oath that you left these children at Mr. Ashworth's property during a dangerous blizzard with no guarantee of their safety or welfare." Derek Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence evaporating under the judge's stern gaze. "Mr. Ashworth," Judge Morrison said, now focusing on Gabriel, "while your decision to take in these children was unconventional, the evidence shows that you have provided them with stability, love, and care that they had been lacking. The psychological evaluations indicate that both children have flourished under your guardianship." Gabriel felt his heart racing as the judge paused to review her notes one final time. "Therefore, this court hereby grants full legal custody of Rosalie and Celeste Winters to Gabriel Ashworth, with the recommendation that adoption proceedings begin immediately if all parties consent." The words hit Gabriel like a wave of pure joy. Behind him, he heard Mrs. Hammond's quiet sob of relief and the excited whispers of the girls as they realized they were finally, truly safe. A mother's return 2 weeks after the custody hearing. Gabriel received a phone call that would add another layer of complexity to their new family structure. Dr. Patricia was called with news that seemed impossible. Miranda Winters was showing signs of awakening from her coma. "It's still early," Dr. Wells cautioned as Gabriel, Rosalie, and Celeste rushed to the hospital. "But her brain activity has increased significantly over the past few days, and she's been responding to verbal stimuli." The girls were practically vibrating with excitement as they hurried through the hospital corridors. They had never stopped believing their mother would return to them, and now their faith was being rewarded in the most miraculous way possible. When they reached Miranda's room, Gabriel was struck by the change in atmosphere. Where before there had been the heavy stillness of unconsciousness, now there was a sense of anticipation, as if the room itself was holding its breath waiting for her to open her eyes. "Mama," Rosalie whispered, taking her mother's hand gently. Miranda's eyelids fluttered. And then, slowly, painfully, they opened to reveal the same blue eyes as her daughter's. She looked confused and disoriented, but when she saw Rosalie and Celeste, a smile spread across her face that was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "My babies," she whispered, her voice hoarse from months of silence. The reunion was emotional beyond words. Gabriel stood back, allowing the family their moment, while fighting back tears of his own. He had grown to love these girls as his own daughters, but he would never try to replace their mother's place in their hearts. Building. Bridges Miranda's recovery was slow but steady. As she regained her strength and learned about everything that had happened during her coma, Gabriel found himself in the unusual position of explaining how he had become the legal guardian of her children. He had expected anger, resentment, or at least suspicion, but Miranda surprised him with her gratitude. "Save them," she said simply, during one of their conversations, while the girls played in the hospital's family room. "What?" Derek called me. Controlling and overprotective, but I knew something was wrong when he stopped bringing them to visit. I was so afraid of what might happen to them if I didn't wake up. Gabriel studied Miranda's face, seeing where Rosalie and Celeste had inherited their strength and resilience. Despite everything she had been through, there was a fierce determination in her eyes that reminded him of her daughters. "They're remarkable children," Gabriel said. "They've taught me more about love and family in 3 months than I learned in the previous 32 years of my life." Miranda smiled, and Gabriel could see tears gathering in her eyes. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Gabriel nodded, waiting. "Do you want to keep them?" she asked quietly. "Not out of obligation or pity, but because you truly want them in your life permanently." The question caught Gabriel off guard with its directness, but the answer came without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I can't imagine my life without them now, but I would never try to take them away from you. You're their mother and they love you desperately."
Ow.
Miranda was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughters through the window as they worked on a puzzle together. "What if I told you I've been thinking about something unconventional? Something that might seem crazy to most people." An unconventional proposal. What Miranda proposed was indeed unconventional, but as Gabriel listened, he realized it might be the perfect solution for everyone involved. She had lost her job due to her extended absence. Her apartment had been given to someone else. She had no family to help her get back on her feet. Derek had cleaned out their bank account and disappeared. After losing the custody case, leaving her with nothing but medical debt. "The girls are happy with you," Miranda explained. "They feel safe and loved in ways they never did before. I don't want to disrupt that, but I also don't want to disappear from their lives." Her proposal was simple in concept, but revolutionary. In practice, she would move into Gabriel's manor as a member of their unconventional family, not as a servant or employee, but as a co-parent, working together to raise Rosalie and Celeste in an environment where they could have both their biological mother and the man who had rescued them from the storm. "I know it sounds strange," Miranda continued, "but these girls have been through enough upheaval. They need stability, and they need all the love they can get. If you're willing to share your home and your heart with one more person, I think we could make this work." Gabriel was stunned by the offer, but as he thought about it, he realized it made perfect sense. The manor was certainly large enough, and Mrs. Hammond had already expressed her fondness for Miranda during her visits. Most importantly, it would mean that Rosalie and Celeste wouldn't have to choose between the two adults who loved them most. The Art of Family. 6 months later, Gabriel's manor had been transformed into something unrecognizable from the lonely fortress it had once been. Miranda had moved into a suite of rooms on the 2nd floor, and together they had created a home that buzzed with activity and laughter. Celeste's artistic talents had blossomed under Miranda's encouragement and Gabriel's resources. He had converted one of the unused rooms into a proper art studio, complete with professional supplies and excellent lighting. The walls throughout the house were now decorated with her drawings and paintings, each one capturing moments of joy and beauty that transformed the space from a museum into a living, breathing home. Rosalie had discovered a love for cooking and gardening, working alongside Mrs. Hammond to maintain both the kitchen and the extensive gardens surrounding the manor. She had also shown remarkable academic ability, and Gabriel had enrolled both girls in Edinburgh's finest private school, where they were thriving academically and socially. Miranda had found work as a freelance graphic designer, her artistic skills finally having an outlet that provided both creative satisfaction and financial contribution to their household. But more than that, she had found peace in watching her daughters flourish in ways she had never imagined possible. Love unexpected what none of them had anticipated was the gradual shift in the relationship between Gabriel and Miranda. It began with shared parenting duties and long conversations about the girls' futures, but slowly evolved into something deeper and more profound. Gabriel found himself drawn to Miranda's strength and resilience, her ability to find joy despite everything she had endured. Miranda, in turn, was moved by Gabriel's transformation from a lonely businessman into a devoted father figure, who put his family before everything else. Their first kiss happened on a quiet evening in late autumn, after they had tucked the girls into bed and were sitting by the fire discussing plans for the holidays. It was tentative and sweet, filled with the wonder of two people discovering love in the most unexpected circumstances. "Is this crazy?" Miranda whispered, her hand still resting on Gabriel's cheek. "Probably," Gabriel admitted with a smile. "The best things in my life have come from embracing the crazy." A Christmas miracle, their first Christmas together as a complete family, was magical in ways that none of them could have imagined. The manor was decorated with garlands and lights. A tree in the great hall reached nearly to the ceiling, and the house was filled with the scents of Mrs. Hammond's holiday baking. On Christmas morning, as they gathered around the tree to exchange gifts, Gabriel realized that he had everything he had never known he wanted. Rosalie and Celeste sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully unwrapping presents with the deliberate attention they gave to everything important in their lives. Miranda sat beside him on the sofa, her hand intertwined with his, while Mrs. Hammond bustled about serving hot chocolate and homemade pastries. "I have one more gift," Gabriel announced. Reaching into his jacket pocket for a small velvet box, Miranda's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee beside the sofa. The girls gasped with excitement as they realized what was happening. "Miranda Winters," Gabriel said, his voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "You and your daughters rescued me from a life I didn't even realize was empty. Will you marry me and make this family official in every way that matters?" The ring was simple but elegant, solitaire diamond that caught the light from the tree and sparkled like captured starlight. But more beautiful than any jewelry was the smile that spread across Miranda's face as she said yes. Epilogue. 5 years later, the wedding had been small but perfect. Held in the garden of the manor on a sunny spring day with only their closest friends in attendance. Rosalie and Celeste had served as flower girls, scattering rose petals along the path as Gabriel and Miranda exchanged vows under an arch of white flowers. Now, 5 years later, Gabriel stood in that same garden watching his family enjoy a summer barbecue. Rosalie, now 13, was helping Mrs. Hammond serve lemonade to their guests, while Celeste, equally grown but still devoted to her art, sat at a picnic table, sketching the scene with practiced skill. Miranda was 8 months pregnant with their first child together, a son they had decided to name William, after Gabriel's father. She sat in the shade, one hand resting on her rounded belly, while she laughed at something Dr. Patricia Wells was telling her. Gabriel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a blizzard and 2 frightened children at his gates, but it had evolved into something far more beautiful than he could have ever planned. He had learned that family wasn't just about blood or legal documents. It was about choice, commitment, and the daily decision to love and care for each other through whatever challenges life might bring. Celeste looked up from her sketchbook and caught his eye, giving him the shy smile that always reminded him of that first night when she had been too afraid to speak above a whisper. She had grown into a confident young artist whose work was already being displayed in local galleries. But she would always be the scared little girl who had taught him that love was about seeing potential and nurturing it with patience and faith. Rosalie bounded over to him, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad, Mrs. Hammond says we can have fireworks tonight if the weather stays clear." Gabriel smiled at being called Dad, a title that had evolved naturally over the years and meant more to him than any business award or financial achievement ever could. "That sounds perfect, sweetheart. What do you think? Should we make it a celebration?" What are we celebrating? Rosalie asked, tilting her head with curiosity. Gabriel looked around at his family, his home, and the life they had built together. From the ashes of loneliness and loss, everything, he said simply. We're celebrating everything. As the sun began to set over Edinburgh, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Gabriel knew that the blizzard that had brought Rosalie and Celeste to his gates had been more than just a storm. It had been destiny, arriving in the form of two small angels who had taught him that the greatest treasures in life couldn't be bought. They could only be given freely, with open hearts and open arms, to those brave enough to love without reservation. The fireworks that night painted the darkness with bursts of color and light. But they were nothing compared to the illumination that had filled Gabriel's life from the moment he had chosen to open his door to love. In saving two children from a blizzard, he had discovered that they had actually saved him, transforming his cold, empty existence into something warm and wonderful and worth every precious moment.